We're back with more of the growing fallout from the New York Times interview with Donald Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, who in taped conversations with a reporter shared this about the former president's feelings towards Hitler.
He commented more than once that, that Hitler did some good things too. And of course, if you know history, again, I think he's lacking in that. But if you know what Hitler was all about, it'd be pretty hard to make an argument that he did anything good.
Joining us now, political White House correspondent Eugene Daniels, former Republican governor of Ohio, John Kasich, and Alexei McCammond, host of the In Sync with Alexei podcast. Eugene, give us a little bit of context as to who John Kelly is and what he's alleging the former president repeatedly talked about.
Yeah, John Kelly is the former Department of Homeland Security secretary under Trump, and then he was the longest-serving chief of staff, as you said, for Trump. This is a man who has a storied history as a general in this country, a lot of respect across the board with Republicans and Democrats, someone who Donald Trump liked the idea of him being chief of staff because he was a general, and he's also someone, if you look at the history of the Trump administration, who aides and allies of his would say tried to stop Trump's worst instincts, as they will put it and have put it in books and articles over the last few years. And what he's saying is that that Donald Trump behind closed doors, as you previewed, is interested in Trump's own words at times, the idea of being in charge with no holds barred, right? And in a lot of countries, they call that a dictatorship. And as Kelly puts it, that he's interested in kind of being a fascist. Right, that is something from John Kelly, his longest-serving chief of staff, and we've seen John Kelly talk about things like this over the years. Right, we found out time and time again that he was a background source for certain people when talking about the way that Donald Trump spoke about military veterans and folks who've been killed in line and in service to this country, and so these things are very in line with that. But I will say, what is it, October 23rd today, this close to the election, it is also something that the Harris campaign and Democrats are saying is something that those Republicans that they're very interested in bringing over to vote for Harris want to hear and could move some of those votes. And probably the most important aspect of this is, one, the Harris campaign obviously had a call about this, a press call. They're probably, I would not be shocked to hear Vice President Harris sometime today talk about this. It is very in line with how they're trying to shape this argument about Donald Trump as we head into the final days of this election.
John, what do you make of this?
The fact is, I've talked to people about these things, not just this general, but other people who worked for him who have said that he's no good to be president again. I had a conversation this morning with a friend of mine who he has a highly decorated brother, and I said, "Does this bother you?" He said, "No." And I said, "Why doesn't it bother you?" He said, "I think these people were all the ones complaining. They stood in the way. Trump wanted to do things, and they got in his way. And by the way, where was this general when we were getting out of Afghanistan?" And I mean, Jose, there's no argument you can have. You can make your points, but when people are locked in, either because they are 100% supporters of Trump, no matter what he does, or they are people who basically say, he just talks, or their disdain for some of the things that they've seen in the Biden administration. So do I think this can have an impact? Probably on the margin. We all shake our heads, those who have been around politics for many, many years, that this kind of rhetoric could be acceptable, or these thoughts could be acceptable. But I'm not here to make an argument, against them, because I'm not going to change their mind. I'd argue with them all day long, but I figured out they are where they are. Now, there'll be some people on the margin who will say, yep, this convinces me to go for Harris. I don't know how many will do that. The other thing is, this is now down 2 weeks to go. This is about turnout. Which candidate gets the turnout of their supporters? do they get enough people out there to be able to win the election? That's what we have to keep our eye on. Who's turning out? What are the numbers? We've got to look at the data.
Alexi, I want to turn to Vanessa Guillen, an Army private who was killed by a fellow soldier in 2020. Then President Trump invited her family to the White House, supported the Guillen Act, promised her family he'd pay for her funeral if needed. According to The Atlantic, later that year, when the White House got the bill, Trump allegedly said, quote, "It doesn't cost $60,000 to bury an effing Mexican." Guillen's sister is challenging that. Mark Meadows is denying the report. What do you see as the impact of this?
I mean, it's just abhorrent. It's disgusting language. It's a disgusting racist sentiment from somebody who was the former president, who wants to be the president again. It speaks to the way that he views women, women of color, people who have died in this country while serving for our country. He has no respect for anyone but himself and his bottom line, which, as we all know, he has to falsify documents to try to make it look like he is worth more than he actually is, because he is so concerned about appearances and money that he can only think in those terms. It should be a wake-up call to people who wonder whether or not Donald Trump as president again would be looking out for them or looking out for himself, whether he would care more about the numbers on the bill at the end of the day or the impact that it would have for the families in need at that time. It is a crazy thing to say, no matter who you are. It is a disgusting thing to say as the former president and as somebody who is asking folks of this country, her family included, to support him and make him president again.
Yeah, I just want to always think about Vanessa Guillen and the Guillen Act, but just that family that suffered so much. Governor, both of these articles come 13 days before the election. How much does timing here matter?
Well, you know, you wonder how much is already baked in. I mean, when Trump says things, you know, do people just, is it all baked in? That's what they get with Trump. And again, at this point, I think I flabbergasted at times. I had really a pretty good discussion with some people about a week ago about these kinds of things. But every time I get into those discussions, Jose, I realize I'm working myself up more than I'm getting them to think differently. I've just got to the point now where, you know, again, what's baked in is baked in. And the key is Harris she's going to win. She's going to get her people out. And the same thing goes for the Republicans. There is a report out of the Washington Post that Republicans in early voting are kind of caught up to Democrats, which is, you know, wasn't true the last time. I don't know if that report has been really closely examined, but again, Jose, I've been in so many campaigns myself that at the end, it's just a blur, and you just go, and you get your people fired up enough to get out there and vote. And that's why Obama is out there now, trying to get the Democrats aroused, get them going. Bruce Springsteen's going out. It would only make a difference, in my opinion, on turnout more than it would on changing people's minds. I think people are pretty darn locked in.
Yeah, and turnout, as you say, is going to be key. And Eugene, turning back to the vice president, here's what she had to say when Hallie Jackson asked her about gender-affirming care. Listen to this.
I believe that people, as the law states, even on this issue about federal law, that is a decision that doctors will make in terms of what is medically necessary. I'm not going to put myself in the position of a doctor.
It sounds like what you're saying is there should be something between trans Americans and their doctors. It feels like that's a long way from "we see you and we love you," which was your message to trans Americans in May. What do you want the LGBTQ plus community to know as they're looking for a full-throated backing from you for trans Americans?
I believe that all people should be treated with dignity and respect.
Eugene, do you see clarity here?
We're looking for clarity with politicians. You know, that's rare nowadays. I think, you know, what the Harris campaign is trying to do is figure out a way to stay with what she's been saying, right, as Hallie said, how she sees and has worked with trans people and people in the LGBTQIA plus community for years, decades. And also there's a concern within the campaign about how those kind of middle of the road voters, people who maybe don't hate or dislike trans people, people, but maybe haven't met any, don't understand it, aren't educated on the actual facts of trans non-binary people in this country, not to turn them off, right, as we get closer. But there are people in the LGBTQIA plus community who are frustrated by that, who want to hear more from Vice President Harris, who they have seen as an ally for a really long time, for good reason, right? You remember when her marrying the first gay couple to get married when she was in California. That happened. That was something that she did, and so they have concerns. I don't know that it's enough to turn people off from voting, but as the governor was saying, so much of this is happening on the margin. So every single vote, every single person who could vote, every low propensity voter is someone that they should be focused on. And, you know, there is a little bit of a risk here for people feeling like there isn't clarity on this answer. You know, Vice President Harris is putting it in kind of the argument that she has made about her being a president who would follow the law, right? But some people don't see it as a question of law and order or law illegal and illegal, but of morality.